Welcome to the 242 Next Steps podcast. Our mission is to help people take next steps with God. We believe everyone has a next step. What's yours? And now your host, Jim Damon.
Hello and welcome to the 242 Next Steps podcast. I'm your host, Jim Damon, and today we're going to tap into our creative energy by talking with 242 lead worship pastor, Jimmy Savage. Jimmy, how are you doing today, sir?
I am doing really well, Jim. Good to see you.
Good to see you too. And you
know,
know,
that beard is looking so good.
Oh, please stop. It's going to have a podcast of its own very soon from what I hear.
It should. Does it have an Instagram account yet?
It has that, and it also has an agent, so just be aware.
Perfect.
Our audience may recognize your voice if they've been listening to our podcast because you actually provide the intro and the wrap to every single episode, which is pretty sweet.
Yeah, it was cool to get to do. A pleasure.
So today we have a little Jim and Jimmy conversation. We're going to talk all about creativity. And I thought this would be a really great topic for us because, number one, to be honest with you, I don't consider myself to be a very creative person. I can barely color in the lines or hum a tune on any sort of a pitch. But I decided to do a little bit of research and just see, well, what do people think about their own creativity? And I came upon a study not too long ago. It was conducted about 5,000 adults, and they were asked, do you feel you're a creative person or you've reached your creative potential? And I was shocked to find out that 75% of the people, or 1 in 4 in that, said, I've not reached my creative potential or I would not consider myself to be a creative person. So that doesn't leave a whole lot of people like you out there, Jimmy. And I thought, let's figure out what we need to do to tap into that creative potential that all of us have. Are you game to talk about that?
I'm thrilled to talk about it.
Cool. Well, let's do that. Before we get into that, though, Jimmy, share with us a little bit about yourself. Where'd you grow up? How did you get into ministry, specifically worship ministry? And because we're talking a little bit of music today, give me your favorite one-hit wonder.
Oh, favorite one-hit wonder. It's so my favorite one-hit wonder is without a doubt from a movie about one-hit wonders, ironically enough, from the movie called The Wonders. Or it's actually called That Thing You Do by the band The Wonders.
Yes,
the song
is such a good movie.
That Thing You Do.
Yep.
So I mean, they wrote it intentionally to be a one-hit wonder. I don't know if it's fair to classify it as a one-hit wonder though, but it's probably my favorite whenever it comes up. I think everything about that movie is magic to me. Mm-hmm. I mean, I grew up as a kid. Hey, it feeds into my story a little bit. So I mean, I grew up making music at home. I was kind of required to play an instrument as a kid. At least that's the way I remember it, that I was required to play.
Okay.
And I started playing piano when I was just a kid. I was probably, 7 maybe when I started piano lessons. And I hated it. My piano teacher smelled like mothballs. And
ooh.
She would hum along as you're playing, and she was a really beautiful pianist, but she could not sing. So which was bizarre. So she'd be humming the wrong note to what we were playing, and the whole thing was terrible.
That sounds tough to learn.
It was
in
weird,
that environment.
And I begged my dad to let me quit piano, and he's, as I remember it, he's like, well, you have to play something. And I was like, something cool like the guitar. And so, again, as I remembered, it was pretty quick. I stopped piano lessons. My dad came home from work one day with a guitar for me, and then that was kind of like history. I couldn't put it down. All I wanted to do was play. And then found that movie pretty young, started doing bands and garage bands with friends and kids from school, or then kids from youth group at church. And just everything in my life, in my teenage years, really started revolving around making music and playing music with friends. And so this movie comes out about a band and a bunch of guys, and I just couldn't get enough of it. And they write this hysterical song, That Thing You Do, and it's so good and so catchy.
It is a catchy tune. I'm humming it in my head right now. Probably not on tune, but I am humming it just thinking about that movie. That's
every
good.
time I sit by a drum set, I do that beginning. Poof, ba, 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 poof, ba, ba. I just can't not play that song.
That's good. That's good. Tell me a little bit about your move into worship ministry. At some point, it sounds like your love for music and creativity got hardwired early on in life. Tell me about that moment where you felt called to do this vocationally and as a passion, as a way to serve even.
Yeah, it kind of came, it caught me by surprise. I didn't think I'd ever wade my way into it. I really did not want to go into ministry when I was a teenager. It wasn't where my head was at. I wanted to be in a band and I wanted to do the thing. And having some of that opportunity, I toured quite a bit right out of high school and spent some time on the road with friends and making music, and it was great. And towards the end of my touring days, the groups I was in started getting more invites to go do church camps or play for big youth groups and I don't even know what they were called anymore, but things that like Spring Hill Camp in Everett, Michigan, quite a few times. And just so now leading worship became a part of what we were doing with music. But we had, the groups I was in, we weren't worship bands. So we were learning to do worship in front of a bunch of students, and it was rowdy and fun and passionate. And there was a shift that started happening into me from doing that, where it was beautiful. When you're traveling as a band, when you're like a kid, you don't have any money generally, and you're just scrounging your way, trying to sell yourself and sell every album or T-shirt you have at the end of the night so you can make it to the next show or eat dinner that night.
You need gas for the van to get to the next place.
Exactly. You're just scrapping by and or throwing out at the end of a set, hey, there's 4 of us in the band and we need a place to sleep tonight. Anybody want us to come to your house?
That's great.
And it was very fun, but so now we're starting to do worship a little more, and there was this thing that shifted where there was not this pressure anymore to try to sell ourselves or, the pressure was off of us and the spotlight was off of us. And now suddenly the spotlight was just about Jesus. And there was something freeing in that to my soul. And I couldn't get enough of it. I wanted to be around it more and more. And I did a camp. It was like 3 days heads up. I got invited to do a student retreat with Kensington Church from the Troy area.
Okay.
And they invited me to come do it, and it was 3 days from then, and I was reluctant to do it, but did it, and it was amazing. It was a phenomenal retreat. It was one of the first times I went just on my own. I didn't go with the band I was in. I played with the students from that youth group, and God really grabbed my attention that weekend. And then the youth pastor at the time came up to me afterwards and said, hey, why don't you consider coming and doing an internship with us? And I was supposed to go to Nashville for school. I was going to go to, really passionate about going to Belmont University in Nashville to go study music or whatever. I was just thinking that maybe that'd be my next step, and very clearly felt God say that is not your next step. And there was this internship opportunity at Kensington, and so I took that. And then through that, I got to be around some of the most amazing musicians I've ever met, some brilliant creative people, and just fell more in love with Jesus and more in love with people and more in love with what music and creativity can do, and helping us respond to him, experience him, feel his presence, and then the way it just carries us through. I think what you put in is what you put out, and we live in a world where there is so much art, and we are bombarded with artistic expression all day long, whether it be in advertisement or marketing or movies or TV or music, whatever. And not all of it points to really positive things, and not all of it is actually beneficial for your mental space or your heart at all. But when you spend effort to listen to music or watch movies or experience art that has heart and passion behind it, it is beautifully filling for your soul. And I just got an overdose of that, and I just wanted to be around it more. And by the grace of God, he just gave me opportunity after opportunity to live in this world. So now I've been doing full-time ministry for about 15 years now.
Wow. You're a teenager in that calling. That's great. Well, I'm assuming, again, not being the most creative individual, I'm assuming a creative person like yourself then kind of dwells off and on in a headspace of creativity on a daily basis. So can you walk us through what a day in the life of somebody who is a musician or an artist looks like, to stay in that creative headspace, to be inspired? What does that look like for you?
I think it goes back to what you said, where 75% of people would say, right, that they're not creative or not thriving in their creativity. I think the average person, I feel, at least for me, I feel like 75% of the time I'm not in that creative headspace.
Oh,
I'm not
okay.
living in creativity. And I think for me, a reworking of the definition of creativity. Some guys I follow in the creative space world, they will say that creativity is just simply problem solving. And it's not about necessarily creating a new work of art. That is what is creativity is problem solving. You have a problem and you need to find a solution in that little spot in the middle there. That's creativity. What do you do to solve the problem? And if the problem is you have a thought that needs created, that's the problem. Well, then your creativity might be songwriting. Or there's a story that needs to be told. Well, the creative process then is figuring out how to tell that story. Some of the most brilliant leaders I know are some of the most creative people I've ever met. They might not be making music or art specifically, but they are brilliant problem solvers. So I think a reworking of that understanding that what I need to do to be creative is I just need to solve problems well. My wife will often say that she's not creative or wishes she's more creative, but my wife is one of the best problem solvers I have ever known.
Well, I know your wife is also a mom, and all moms, regardless, are great problem solvers.
Yes.
So they're definitely artists in my book then.
You are right. So I think for me, a reworking of the understanding of what it means to be creative is really important for me. And then otherwise, staying inspired. If I am trying to do something specifically on the creative spectrum, and I am trying to create something or make something new or write a song or do a video or tell a story, whatever, then there's twofold things. One, I need to stay inspired. So I need to be intaking a lot of creativity. I need to be experiencing really great storytelling. I need to be listening to really great songs. I need to listen to the songwriters share the stories of how they got these great songs. I need to be reading a lot. I mean, I know they say leaders are readers, but anybody who's creative is a reader. You need to be intaking great content. And then when you need to turn on your creative faucet and you've got a well that's not empty and you've got ideas to pour out and you've got new and fresh thoughts to share. Yeah. So for me, it's mostly just paying attention to what's happening around me, intentionally trying to watch things or listen to things and stay creative with my input so that I have a output to be able to be creative from.
I love that. So whether you're just trying to problem solve or you're in a creative space, I'm assuming at times there are roadblocks to that.
Absolutely.
What acts as a roadblock maybe in your life to creativity? What do you do to overcome those roadblocks?
Roadblocks are tricky. I guess it depends on the what. So my main avenue for creativity, especially right now anyway, is songwriting. So I've been doing lots of songwriting, and that's probably my greatest outlet at the moment. And that often goes in waves too. Sometimes it shifts into different things. But right now, songwriting is my main creative outlet. And one of my favorite songwriters of all time is a guy named John Foreman from the band Switchfoot. I love all of Switchfoot's music, but then John Foreman, did a solo project, which is, from a songwriting standpoint, it's like off the charts. It's brilliantly creative.
I'm pretty sure he listens to this podcast, by the way. So
I hope
good
so. Hey, John.
that you gave a shout out to John there. Good job.
And I got to meet him one time. I'm friends with his brother-in-law, who is from Michigan. So I went out to dinner one time. I got invited to go to dinner when he was in town. And
nice.
It was the coolest thing ever. So I asked him, and they were like before, and they're like, "Don't overload him with questions." And I was like,
play cool,
"Okay,
play
I
cool.
will just sit here and be like, I am having dinner with John Foreman." And but I asked him towards the end. We're like walking back to the concert venue before a Switchfoot concert, and I was like, "I'm so sorry. I have to ask you, how do you write songs like you do?" I'm like, "You're such a great songwriter." I said something really dumb and cheesy and like fangirling over John Foreman, and he kind of laughed, and he all he talks about is surfing. By the way, which was so funny. All he talks about is surfing. But he said, "I'm not a great songwriter," which is such an annoying comment from such a great songwriter. But he said he's a disciplined songwriter, which there's a difference. So he pointed out that he writes a song a day. At least that's the goal.
That's
so
a pace.
Whether it's a chorus or an idea, or he writes something every single day, whether he had something brilliant to write about or nothing at all. And that particular day, he said an example was that he one time saw a Dalmatian peeing on a fire hydrant, which is like a picture out of like a kid's storybook, right?
Sure.
And he's like, I've seen this image 100 times on a story, but I've never seen it in real life. And that day I saw it and I thought, all of these storybook things have come to life in this moment. And that was his song for the day.
Okay.
It was about a Dalmatian. And he's like, it wasn't inspired, it wasn't amazing, but it was written so that when inspiration hit, there's no such thing as writer's block. And that was kind of his big idea. There is no such thing as writer's block. Writer's block just means out of practice. And I think, and that was a really mind-blowing concept for me. And so I think for me anyway, and I think a lot of artists, some of the biggest roadblocks we find is just being out of practice. We need to solve a problem, or we want to write a song, or we want to tell a story, or we want to do a sculpture or some sort of work of art, but we haven't done anything in a long time. It's really hard to work and do a really beautiful, inspired work if you haven't been working on that medium for a long time. Right?
I'm thinking of a similarity to an athlete that is used to training or exercising on a daily basis.
Yeah,
they're ready
absolutely.
to jump in at a moment's notice because their body recognizes it's time to go for that, right? So
Yes.
it sounds similar in the creative process that if you're disciplined and doing things daily, that the muscle memory, the creative muscle, so to speak, is ready to go.
Absolutely. Yeah, no one's going to like decide today they're going to run a 10K tomorrow and thrive in that. If
Sure.
you're not trained or prepared, you won't make it to the finish line. You will, or at least at a pace that you're going to be proud of. You may drag yourself across the finish line, but you're not going to be inspired by your effort. You're just going to get it done, maybe.
Yeah.
In art, it's very much the same way. If you just suddenly have a brilliant idea, but you've never tried before, I mean, I don't know any story of a songwriter that wrote one amazing song and they've never written any other songs in their life. It just doesn't happen. It's a practice. It's a discipline. And so I think that's one of the biggest roadblocks is we get out of practice, we get out of the discipline, and then inspiration hits and we can't find a way to get it out.
Yeah. You just mentioned that analogy of the finish line. As an artist, when do you know you've crossed a finish line with the project? How do you know that something is done? Or is it ever done? I don't know.
Yeah. That's one of the hardest things. That is one of the hard. So right now at 242, we are starting a songwriting team, and we are writing songs a ton. And I think, at least in our experience, we could tweak these things, until the cows come home. We could tweak them forever. They're never done. We can just keep working it, and we can keep tweaking it. And then even songs that we've released in the past, or songs that I've released in the past, I still listen to it and I'm like, I should have retook that vocal, or I still feel like that line isn't right. And it's such a funny thing. So I think there's a point where you just have to choose to say, my point came across. Like, I did it. I think it leads to a couple different things. I have found finish lines faster when I go with others and I do art collaboratively. If I'm doing it on my own, I will overthink it, be insecure about it, and I will hold things so tight and be nervous about it. And when people hear it, like, I don't want people to hear it because it's not done yet, or I don't feel 100% about it. But if I collaborate with other people, lines that I might feel like were garbage, they're gonna be like, no, that's awesome. I love that line. That's great. Here, this one that you thought was great is actually the one that needs the work. Let's fix that one. But then as a group, when a group's like, this feels great, it helps inspire it does feel great. Okay, you're right. It is good.
Yeah.
And I think we can move this on to the finish line.
Okay.
So I think it's a couple things. I don't know. I don't know if art is ever done. It's just you get to a point where you feel like the story was told. It was written. It is done. It's time to move it forward. And then collaboratively, I really believe the collaborative process in art is one of the greatest tools to help get a piece of art to the finish line.
Yeah. It sounds too like when you or a group of people can make a decision to say this is ready for others to take in and appreciate, dissect, converse about. That also sounds like that's part of the finish line too. When you feel
Absolutely.
ready for that to go, to release that.
Yes, absolutely.
That's
And
good.
feedback is always great. Yeah, it depends on the project too. So many things have a moving target finish line. So I mean, for songwriting examples, because that's the one I'm living the most in right now. If we write a song, We share it to a small group of people. We'll get feedback and we might make tweaks. And we'll share it with a larger group. We'll get feedback and we'll make some tweaks. And then we'll share it with maybe the church and get feedback. And then we'll make some tweaks. And then we'll sit down in the studio with a producer and they're going to have ideas and tweaks. So, I mean, it just goes through such a process of refinement that by the time a project gets to the end, a lot of times it's like, I'm ready for this song to be done because now we have a new song coming or a new idea. We have to finish this one so we can get on to the next one. So, yeah, I think, sometimes just going through the pipeline is good. And keeping creativity flowing also helps get things across the finish line. I think a lot of times if you only are working on one thing, I mean, you can work it to death.
Yeah.
But if you're working on something and you know you've got another thing coming, there's another iron in the fire, there's another idea coming down the pipeline, you want to keep moving them. And you don't want to miss one, so you want to finish it so you can get this next one that's coming done. And so I think, it's the ongoing process that keeps creativity.
It's assembly line creativity.
Yeah, there you go.
That's good. All right, Jimmy, talk to the person who says, I love listening to you talk about songwriting, but here's the thing. I can't hum a tune. I can't color in the lines. I can't write 3 sentences without 50 spelling mistakes. What do you say to convince that person that creativity is valuable in their life?
Yeah, well, I think in that it goes back to it is problem solving. Creativity in and of itself, just in solving problems, we all have problems that we have to try to find a way to conquer, whether we're trying to get our budgets managed or we're trying to decorate a room in our house or, in my case, we have 4 kids and only 3 bedrooms, 4 kids to live in. And we had to be creative about what do we do with sharing a room and how do we make this space fit 2 kids.
That sounds like a song to be written right there, by the way, Jimmy. You can use that. That sounds like maybe a country song where you're singing about sad stuff. Not enough room.
Not enough room. So I don't know. I think we all deal with some sort of problems. I think part of it is the recognition and understanding of what it means to be creative. And I got a problem to solve, and then so solve it well, and do it intentionally. And then I think God really invites us to create. There's a I don't even know what it was. There was some documentary I watched a long time ago about creativity that was done by some NASA research scientist people, and they interviewed a bunch of kids really young, it was 4 to 8 years old or something like that, and they would have said 97% or whatever. It was a really high number. The majority of these kids they rated as creative geniuses. No shortage of ideas. Constantly something that has never been thought of before. You ever hang out with kids and the ideas they come up with, sometimes you're like, that is so bizarre what you just said. But
yeah,
it's
especially
creative.
when they
It's
draw.
different. When they draw, right? They'll draw anything. Hey, just draw what you see in your head. Okay, cool. Here's something. And they're not worried about what people think about it. They're not worried about how people respond. They throw it out there. And so the NASA scientist guy said a lot of these kids, 97% of them would be creative geniuses on the spectrum here. They're brilliant. And they're not worried about what people think. And then they interviewed the same group of kids when they were teenagers. And that number dramatically changed of creative geniuses to almost 50%. So it was cut in half by the time they were teenagers. And then again, when they were in their 30s, and that number went even lower. I believe where the study ended, I got to find it. It was around 15% of them, they said, were still in the creative genius spectrum, where they were really smart kids. And they argued that the reason why that was because we stopped believing in ourselves and we start just taking on all the criticism of the world. And we even if it's not coming directly at us, we will project people's criticism onto our work.
Yeah.
And we get nervous about what people think, and we get worried about how people will respond to something we do. So we stop making, and we stop creating, and we stop trying to be innovative, and we just settle. We just settle to do what's safe, and we settle to do what feels expected of us. So I think my encouragement to anybody when it comes down to if they want to be creative, they want to be more creative, or if they just generally don't think they are, because I really do believe that God made us in his image, right? That's a scriptural concept here. In Genesis, God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created them. Male and female, he created him. Now it's Genesis 1:27. If God made us in his image, one of the characteristics of God is he is a creator. He makes things. He is wildly creative. So if we are legitimately made in God's image, we are made with this innate ability to create. It is in all of us, I really, truly believe. And I think if we can wrap our minds around the fact of, I think it's Colossians 3:23 is a note I have. Whatever you do, do it as if you're doing it unto the Lord, not unto man. You're doing it for the Lord. I think if we can wrap our heads around that the one that we're trying to impress with our creativity is just God. It's not about man. If we are trying to pour out our ideas, our thoughts, our problem solving for any reason at all, it's just to bring glory to God because he made us to create, not just to copy everybody's ideas all the time. Nobody, I don't know, it just, there's a book a guy wrote years ago that I love called Create versus Copy. And he really lives in that argument that so many people find copying a more effective tool of creating because nothing's new under the sun. That is true. And a lot of things we do is borrowed concepts, and that is true. And, you know, major companies have done very successful business because they copied someone else's business plan or copied somebody else's technology. But there is a satisfaction that happens when you create. There is a passion that comes out when you're trying to originally and creatively and uniquely respond to who God is around you and what's going on in the world around you. Just something beautiful happens. So I think just when we can stop worrying about everybody else so much and just do something that makes us feel good or something that we know will make God have a smile on his face, I believe that's when our best creative work can come out.
Jimmy, you've convinced me that we should no longer say, I'm not creative. If you're a problem solver and you're figuring out how to get from point A to point B, you're being creative. So you've really kind of turned that definition for me. So as the Next Steps podcast, let's talk to everybody, those who are the problem solvers, those who would say, I'm not creative, and those who are creative. What are 3 things that any one of us can do today to kind of up our creativity game?
3 things that we could do today to up our creativity day.
I'm taking notes, Jimmy, so make these good.
Goodness gracious, that is a great one. To up our creativity, do something new. Something that you haven't done before, something that hasn't been on your radar before. It's, I mean, especially coming out of like quarantine season, right? We've all been kind of stuck at home doing repeated every day almost feels the exact same. Do something new. If you always take the exact same route home when you're driving home from the store or from work or from whatever, take a different path. Try something new. See if you see something new. If you always start your day with the exact same routine, try something new. Throw off your routine. Sometimes being in the same exact route every day of life is one of the things that is one of the biggest killers of creativity because then you just start going through the motions. So thrust yourself out of the motion and into a new space and just see what happens.
Do something new. Got it.
Do something new. Which I think kind of goes to experiment, right? Try something new and experiment. If you've had an idea, don't let it sit in the idea world anymore. Take your idea to the next step, right? One of the best things that has happened for me is started carrying a journal around again. Like a writing down. I have to not just put a note in my phone. And I do that. I do have, I mean, gosh, the notes section of my phone is just filled with things. But I'll carry around an actual notebook nowadays. So if I have an idea for a song and I hear something on the radio or I have a conversation with somebody and they say something really unique or interesting and I think, oh, there's a song in that, I'll write it down. Just that was an idea. My phone is full of song ideas that I may or may not ever revisit. But I just throw it down. Or if I see something beautiful that I think could make for a cool story or a cool game night idea with my kids or something, I'll write it down. I'll take a note of it. So I think that's a great step for people to take to enhance your creativity is just start taking notes. Start taking notes of the cool things that you see in the world around you. Any idea, any phrase, any thought, there's so many things going on in the world that we think are cool and then we completely forget about because there's another thing that grabs our attention constantly. So just start taking notes of the things that grab your attention during the day and, start reading back through those. You might find that enhances an idea in you or takes an idea to the next level just by paying attention to it.
Love it.
And then the only thing I would say, the third thing is find people to do life with. find people to be creative with. If you have any kind of bend creatively, don't always do it on your own. I know a lot of artists feel like it needs to start personally before it goes into anybody else. I think that's fine, realistically speaking. So much art is individual, and it is raw and vulnerable a lot of times to put your ideas down or start doing something or start crafting something. But there's a point where it needs to get outside of just your basement or outside of your garage, and it needs to be shared with even just one other person or two other people that you trust. And then from there, it usually will start moving to more people. So I would just say, get out of your basement and get out of your quiet space with your art and show it to somebody. If you've got anything that you've done that's creative or something that you're working on, share it with somebody. See what happens.
So good. So I've got do something new, experiment and write it down, and be creative in community. Three things right there as next steps. Jimmy, those are great. And, when we're finishing up here, I felt so inspired during this time. I've written a song. I would love to just give you that song. Maybe you could refine it, and use it on the weekend for worship. How does that sound?
I'd love it. Let's do it. Let's do it.
Well, Jimmy, it's been absolutely awesome having you on the podcast to talk about creativity. And I know I learned some great things, and I'm sure our audience did too.
Awesome. I hope so.
I want to thank you, and I also want to thank our audience for listening to the Next Steps podcast. Make sure you check back next week for a new guest, a new topic, and a new episode.
Thank you for joining us on today's podcast. If you like what you just listened to or know someone who would, be sure to check out more great content from wherever you stream your podcasts. Simply search 242 Next Steps Podcast.
Hey, we're back here. We've got a little bonus conversation to have here with Mr. Jimmy Savage. Before we got started with the podcast, I was talking with Jimmy, and he mentioned that he has done some voiceover work in the past. And I thought, what an incredible conversation to have, specifically because he's done the voiceover for our podcast itself. You hear his voice at the beginning, at the end. So, Jimmy, could you just share with us, what is a voiceover actor, somebody who's doing voiceover? How did they get into that? What does that look like?
It's really cool. There's so much to it, realistically. If you watch any YouTube videos of, specifically some of the people that do the Transformers voices, if you've ever wanted to see
I was a kid of the 80s. Oh my gosh, Transformers, yes.
Oh my goodness. If you watch a YouTube video of the voice actor for Optimus Prime, and he's standing in a vocal booth, this just normal kind of old guy, and it's and we put this message amongst the stars, and you're like, wow, how does that come out of him?
Yes.
It's really cool. But anyway, so these voice actors, I don't even know how it all started. I don't know why it started for me. Largely just maybe singing. I did a lot of singing. I did voice training and voice lessons for a long time, and they teach you different inflections and tone and dynamic and bringing it up and bringing it down, talking from the back of your throat, really talking from your diaphragm. And there's different ways to make your voice sound. And it's fun, right? If you've ever talked to a baby and you use just a little baby voice when you can, right? There's different things to do with your mouth that can be really fun. Or Gollum from Lord of the Rings was always one of my favorites. My precious, right? He's so creepy, but there's so many fun things you can do with this.
I've been meaning to interview him, actually. If you know him, I'd love to have him on sometime.
But I love sometimes singing in his voice, which I think is fun. I called my sister the other day for her birthday. And for her birthday, I was like, happy birthday to you. And she's like, I don't even know what to say to that. It's just for fun.
That's so good.
But I think a lot of times it just starts because it's fun. And, the more you just play around with voices, you can find that it's a lot of fun. And you make up new ones and have a good time with it. And so for me, it was just one of those, I was singing a lot. I learned how to talk a lot. And then randomly, it started at church. I was doing ministry and doing media work, and we needed a voiceover for a bumper video or a commercial thing that we were doing. And I was trying to get a guy that was doing the voice acting thing for us. I was trying to get this person who I thought had the right voice for the video to read the script with all of the energy and passion and dynamic it needed, and he was not getting it. And so I kept reading it over and over and doing it. And so when he left and it was a super mediocre take, everybody else in the room with me was like, okay, now why don't you just do what you asked him to do? Because that was perfect. I was like, oh, all right, cool, let's try it.
There you go.
And so I just started doing them more and more, and then it just kind of spread, just getting invites to do it. But most of the time, the voiceovers I do are not anything particularly fun. It's like, I get to read a script in my normal voice, or they want something more serious, and so I got to get a little more low, a little closer to the microphone, and it feels a little heavier, more intense. So that's kind of, I've done a bunch of different things for lots of different churches, or a couple different car dealerships for radio. I did an Audible book one time. That was fun.
Wow. How many pages was that bad boy?
It wasn't too bad. It was like, I think that was like, I actually don't even remember. It was like a 50 or 60 page thing.
Okay.
It was not long.
Yeah.
Which was good. It took me like maybe an hour to read it.
All right.
But it was fun to get to do, and I had to do a couple different character voices for it, which was fun. So.
How about your favorite voiceover job that you had to do, and maybe you could give us a little bit of that voice while you're sharing that.
Favorite voiceover work I've done.
Or if you can't think of that, what would be the ideal? What's the one you want to do?
The one I want to do? I want to do the movie voice thing.
The In a World guy?
Yeah.
Give it to us. Give it to us, Jimmy.
I don't know that I can do it as well. There's a comedian I love that he can do that voice really well, and it's always my favorite to like make it up. Oh gosh, what is I wanna remember it because it's so funny. I don't know. Yeah. In a world.
That's perfect. That's perfect. You could just fill in the blank.
Arnold Schwarzenegger
will not be at the movies because of COVID.
Little tortilla boy. Right.
That's so good.
He sold tortillas on the corner.
I
always thought that voice was just amazing.
That is fun.
You can take any topic and make it sound really cool.
We need to see that happen at a church service on some week. Maybe if we do
at the movies again.
At the movies during the summer at some point, we need In a World intro from you. Would be great.
In a world where beards were going out of style, one man, Jim Damon.
There it is, folks. Very good. You could keep going with it. All right. Thanks, Jimmy.
All right. Thanks, man.